So I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Incidentally, I had been hearing from a number of you who were very interested in the National Popular Vote Compact. And coincidentally, we have someone here from the League of Women Voters of Maine, which is a supporter of this compact. When we started our meeting, we asked all of you to fill out a poll question. Have you heard of the National Popular Vote Compact? And here are the results. 43% yes, and they support it. 23% still have questions. That's good. We've got someone here who can answer those questions. No, I'd like to learn more. And no, I have not. So we're going to be able to answer all of these questions. Will is the advocacy program coordinator for the League of Women Voters of Maine and Democracy Maine, and he can explain to you the difference between those two organizations. He's been with the League for 3 years. He advocates at the state legislature for the League and Democracy Maine on a variety of issues, including voting rights, campaign finance reform, election methods. And I've asked him to talk about some of the top priorities of the League and then take your questions. Will, I'm going to kick this over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you everyone for having me here tonight. Really excited to talk to you about the work that Democracy Maine and the League of Women Voters of Maine do, particularly in the state legislature and particularly what we're working on this year. So just a very quick sort of explanation of all these organization names. So the League of Women Voters of Maine, of course, is a statewide organization. We're part of the National League of Women Voters, and we also have local chapters across the state, including a Mid-Coast chapter, Portland, Down East, and so on. This organization is one of the organizations that makes up a sort of umbrella partnership we call Democracy Maine. And that includes the League of Women Voters of Maine. It includes Maine Citizens for Clean Elections, which is an organization that's been involved in championing campaign finance reform, particularly the Clean Elections program for over 20 years. And most recently, we've added Maine Student Votes, which does a lot of work engaging young people on campuses, both high school and college, to get involved in our democracy. So that's who we are. And what do? We advocate for issues that we think really are critical to a well-functioning democracy. So as Kelly said, that can include voting rights issues, campaign finance issues, really issues of representation, equality. And so we could cover everything under that umbrella practically, but we try to hone in on areas where we really feel like we have, the perspective, the expertise, the membership support to lead on. So the way we decide what we work on is it's really our members. Our members tell us what is important to them. We have an advocacy committee that is primarily volunteers that looks at all the issues that have come forward, are coming forward, and helps determine what, if any, position we have on them. Last session, we testified on over 70 bills, which was a little easier with Zoom, but we still try to show up and weigh in whenever we can. One of the most exciting ways that we did this was a day we just had, and I saw Barbara earlier, and I know she was there, for our Advocacy Day, and this was on February 14th. It's the birthday of the League of Women Voters. I'll just throw up a couple of pictures here from that. So folks can see what a good time it was. We were at the State House. We were all talking to our legislators. We talked about the issues that I'm going to talk about tonight. And really, we just, made our voices heard in Augusta. And as I'm sure anyone on this call, I'm sure the legislators on the call can tell you, like, showing up in Augusta, it really does make a big difference. So with that, I guess I'll go ahead and turn to what some of the big issues we've been working on this session are, and I will be very happy to answer questions at the end. So we have 4 bills that we've identified as our highest priority pieces of legislation. And as has gone for this legislative session, none of them have printed yet. So I don't have LD numbers for any of them, but I'm sure you'll hear about them as soon as they're out. I'll go ahead and start with the one that Kelly referenced. It's certainly one that has a lot of interest around it. It's had interest. We've advocated for it for over a decade, and that's the national popular vote. The national popular vote is a proposal to ensure that whichever candidate for president across all 50 states and DC gets the most popular votes for president is the one that's elected president. So that's a little bit of a wordy explanation, but the way I think of it as is no more second place winners. So you don't end up with someone who gets less popular votes, less people across the country voting for them, winning because of the way that we use the Electoral College currently. So the way the national popular vote works is that it's an agreement between states. It's what's called an interstate compact. And these are agreements between states that, they exist on a whole variety of issues, water issues, transportation, et cetera. But this is one specifically on how a state casts its electoral votes. So, we're pretty familiar with how it works in most states, and then, how Maine's a little different. So in most states, whatever candidate gets the most votes, all that state's electoral votes go to that candidate. And then Maine, it's that plus by district. The way that the national popular vote proposes to change this is it says state by state, this is enacted. And then once a number of states that equals 270 or more electoral votes, so that's to say a majority of the Electoral College, once that many states have entered the national popular vote, then all of those states agree that they will cast all of their electoral votes for whoever got the most popular votes across all 50 states in DC. So a couple of key points to that. So one, it doesn't go into effect until 270 electoral votes have joined, even if a state has joined the compact. So if Maine joined today, we would go up to, the compact would have 199 electoral votes in it. So until it hit 270, we would still use our electoral votes the way we use them now. So that's the first part, is that it doesn't immediately change anything about how our electoral votes are cast. The second piece that's important is that it's based on the popular vote across all 50 states in DC. So that's to say that it wouldn't just be counting up the popular votes of all of the states in the compact. You would add up all of the votes for all the candidates across all 50 states in DC, and then all the states in the compact would say, we'll cast our electoral votes for whichever candidate got the most popular votes. And that way, because it's a majority of the Electoral College that would be doing this, you would be guaranteed, no matter how the rest of the states decided to cast their electoral votes, you would be guaranteed to be electing a president who got the most popular votes across all 50 states in DC. So this is an issue that, unlike a lot of changes that would change sort of, structures at a national level, this one, because it's an interstate compact, it has to be passed state by state. And as I said, 195 of the 270 necessary electoral votes have passed it, which is really exciting. It was actually kind of a shame when the census reapportionment happened and it went down one, because from 196 to 195, because we could have been 200 previously with R4, but we can live with being 199. There's a couple other states I'm really optimistic about passing it this year, Minnesota and Michigan in particular. So we really want Maine to be part of that process, part of that forward progress. For a little background, this bill in 2019, it passed the Senate and it came within 1 to 5 votes of passing the House. There were 6 separate roll calls on it, and it came incredibly close to passing. So we know that there's the support. We know that electing the president of the United States by popular vote, the simple principle, every vote is equal, is very popular. It's very popular across the state, across both congressional districts. And so we really believe it's important. Just a couple of the other benefits of it. it would change this sort of notion of battleground states. So there are states that get a very inordinate amount of attention, presidential visits. It's really anywhere from like 5 to 12 states in any given election. And there's this myth that it's small states that get this, because I think, a lot of folks look to New Hampshire right next door. But the reality is the only states that get attention in presidential elections currently are closely divided states. So, that's your Pennsylvania, your New Hampshire right now. It used to be something like Ohio. They won't be getting visits anymore. Wyoming has never gotten visits. So we think it'll change the way presidential campaigns work. We actually think it'll change the way government works if it's nationwide. We see states that are battleground states get more disaster declarations per type of storm because it's, politically helpful to help this state. And we think that, presidential elections should be about who the entire country wants to elect president. I know there may be some questions in the chat. Should I hold those for the end, do you think? Kelly, if you just want to give me a nod, I can take those up at the end or take them now.
I'm going to leave that up to you. Your call.
Okay, well, I just see a couple right now, so I'll take them now. I see a question here about whether it's circumventing the process of getting rid of the Electoral College. And I would say no, because it is, the Constitution is very specific about the fact that, states have these electoral votes, and then they can cast those electoral votes in the manner they so choose. So the Constitution doesn't say use the winner-take-all system that most states use. In fact, the winner-take-all system wasn't common in the first couple of decades of electing the president. The Constitution merely says each state can say how to cast its electoral votes. And so we think that this is something that can be done within the Electoral College. And, I'm not going to stand up here and sing the praises of the wisdom of the people in 1787 who came up with the Electoral College, but we don't see it as a, end around on the Electoral College. Yeah. And I also see a question here, has California passed it? Yes, California has. And I think there's a link that may have been posted or may be posted later to our page. There it is on the national popular vote. And you can see information on all the states that have passed it, a lot of the, arguments and counter arguments around it, and really just a lot of helpful information. Just one quick piece of information I'll give on the legislative process this year. So the sponsor is the speaker, Rachel Babbitt Ross. And we do expect this bill to print in the next couple of weeks. So we will see it. There shouldn't be any surprises because it's an agreement between states. The language has to be the same in every state that passes it. But we should see that coming out soon. And then we will see what time frame the legislature decides to work on it. But really important issue, and really important that legislators hear from their constituents if you think it's important to you. Okay, so I'll move on to a couple of other pieces of legislation that we are supporting this session. The first is expanding ongoing absentee voting. So ongoing absentee voting it's also known as permanent absentee voting. It's a process where when you request an absentee ballot, you can essentially check a box and say, send me an absentee ballot automatically for each election after this. I know I want to vote absentee. Please send me an absentee ballot after this. So it saves the burden of having to, re-request every election if you want to use that voting method. This was passed in 2021. But the version that passed only applied to those over 65 and those self-declaring as having a disability. And, we really think it should be available to everyone. So that's a bill that we are working on with Maddie Daughtry, and we hope that will print soon, and really excited to move that forward. Another issue that we're supporting that I'm sure everyone on this call is very familiar with is tribal sovereignty. We see tribal sovereignty as a fundamental issue of justice, of self-determination, of the ability for the tribes to govern themselves, and it really is, frankly, it's, there's an issue of equality. Every other state in the country, of course, tribes are able to benefit from all the federal legislation that has passed, enjoy these rights. And we think it is long, long, long overdue for Maine tribes to join that. We were up for the lobby day last week. That was the same day as the State of the Tribes. And it was just so inspiring to see so many people out there on that. And we're really hopeful that this is going to be the year to get it done. So we'll be doing everything we can in the realm of education, rallying our members to take action. But that's a really important one to us as well. And then finally, there's a campaign finance bill we're working on, and it's a bill to end foreign government spending in Maine elections. So currently, foreign government-owned companies, foreign government-owned entities can spend in Maine referendum elections, and we see this in some of the recent elections, such as the corridor election, where a company owned by the Hydro-Quebec, which is owned by the government of Quebec, was able to spend in the referendum election. And, we see this as a loophole in campaign finance law. Foreign government-owned entities are banned from spending in candidate elections. And the FEC has basically said, we don't govern referendums, so we can't set restrictions on them. But many states have. And in Maine, we passed a bill to do this in 2021 that was unfortunately vetoed by the governor. And after that, there was a citizen initiative effort. Many of you may have seen this at the polling place, the Protect Maine Elections effort that aimed to collect signatures and put this on the ballot. So the citizens initiative got the signatures. And when you collect those signatures, the process is, you collect the signatures, you turn them in, the Secretary of State certifies it, and then it's presented to the legislature. Now, oftentimes the legislature will just, kind of push it along to the people to vote on. But in this case, and there have been other cases of this where this has happened, we are asking the legislature to pass the bill to end foreign government spending in Maine elections. We're asking them to pass it outright. We know this issue is overwhelmingly popular with Maine voters. We just conducted a poll, scientifically, methodologically sound poll that showed that 88% of Maine voters support this. And when we think that when the citizens turn in a petition like this, they're not saying, please let us vote on this. They're saying, please make this law. So we're asking the legislature to do that. We're very optimistic that it's going to achieve very wide support. We hope the governor will reconsider her reservations to it. But even if she doesn't, we're hopeful that it can get, very, very strong, over 2/3 support. So that is something we're working on moving forward as well. Finally, before I turn to questions, I'll just mention a couple of other things briefly. One is, this is something that came up on Advocacy Day. Folks would come up to me and they would say, I don't think my representative is going to support my issues. And you may have a representative that you don't think will support some of these issues. A couple of things. One, I will say that legislators are very open to conversation, giving them more information about an issue can really open their eyes. They can really appreciate it, even if they don't support an issue. And then secondly, you might be surprised, of the issues I've described, two of these in particular, the ending foreign government spending in Maine elections and tribal sovereignty, those have very wide bipartisan support. And we've had some great conversations with legislators of all parties, with independent legislators, really educating about the issue, and also finding out that we have support where we might not have expected it. So it's always worth that conversation. And then just very finally, I just want to mention some of the other work we're doing. We have a lot of bills we're working on this session. A couple we're really excited about improving access to information about local elections on state websites. It can be very hard to find that information. So we're really excited to help support the ability of the state to share that information, working on a bill for paid time off to vote on election day for folks who can't get any time off during the workday to vote. And then finally, and this is the one you've probably seen in the press, a lot of defense against bad bills. Most notably, recently, two bills, I testified against photo ID with a broad coalition of organizations, and that was a really good showing. I think really made the point that this would have disproportionate effects for certain groups, and really disenfranchise voters. And then yesterday we testified against the bill to ban ballot drop boxes, and that was a spectacular hearing. You can read the news coverage. There was not a single member of the public who testified in support of it, and a lot of organizations standing up and saying this is really bad. So we're fighting for progress to move things forward, and also making sure things don't go backwards. And that's what we're here to do in the legislature. And we really, appreciate all the support of anyone who is able to help out with that work. I will take questions, but I'm also just going to put up on the screen, just again, recapping what our big issues are that we're working on this session. But I will go into the chat and start taking on questions. So we have a question here. Does the League of Women Voters of Maine get good bipartisan support? And I would say yes. I think people really agree with our fundamental mission. There may be people from different parties who fall different ways on some of our advocacy priorities. But, when we were there on Advocacy Day, one of our volunteers, their senator, I believe it was Ann Carney, she like, come here, I'm going to introduce you on the Senate floor. And our volunteer was like, kind of sheepish about it, but it was really great. The whole Senate stood up and clapped. And then after that, a Republican senator stood up and talked about, how like my mom was in the League of Women Voters. I think, the work they do is really important, so on and so forth. And it was really heartening to get this sort of bipartisan support on the floor of the Senate for our mission, which really is, making sure everyone is able to participate in our democracy. I've seen very little opposition to the anti-corruption referendum. Our opponents just funding with dark money. And I would say we haven't seen organized opposition yet to the effort we're doing to pass this, really on the substance of the issue. There's a few people, including currently the Senate president, who have said they think that they should honor the will of the voters by letting it go all the way to referendum. And, as I've said, we don't view it that way. We view when citizens submit these signatures, they're saying, this is what we want passed. So we're still working to, get people on board, just understand how universally popular this is. Because again, there is very little opposition on the basis of the issue. Okay, I see a question here about the voter registration efforts the league leads. So we have a variety of voter registration efforts. The one I think that most gets at your question here, Kelly, about identifying communities where voter registration assistance is needed, how we reach them, et cetera, is it's a program we conducted last fall. We've conducted for several years called Neighbor to Neighbor. And this is really, this is sort of that principle that was alluded to earlier, knock every door. And we go to areas that have especially low voter turnout, or areas with, larger communities of new Mainers. And we don't look at a list of, who's registered and contact them. We just knock on every door. We have conversations about voting. Sometimes it won't be people who are eligible to register to vote, but sometimes it's people who have never had their door knocked and don't know the process, don't know where to go to vote. And it's really trying to reach the hardest to reach people. So that's the effort I'm most proud of. We also do work. We register voters at naturalization ceremonies. There was a nice article in the Bangor Daily News about that a couple of weeks ago. And then you can find us at fairs across the state during the summer. Always happy to register people, update registrations, and all of that.
Will, could I ask you a question? Does the league have any programs that specifically target young voters? And I don't just mean people who are on the cusp of turning 18. I mean people who traditionally have not participated in the electoral process because they felt it doesn't apply to them. 20-year-olds, 21, 22. Do you have any programs, and do you have any advice for us? Because that is certainly, of course, you're nonpartisan. We are very partisan. So we're going to be working hard to engage people who haven't been traditionally engaged here. And any advice you can offer on reaching, people under the age of 30, under the age of 40, that would be really helpful.
Sure, certainly. And so I think the biggest thing really is just inviting people into the process. one piece of legislation we passed last time was the semi-open primaries bill, which allows unenrolled voters to vote in party primaries. And I know there's a wide variety of views on that, but the major reason that we supported it was because the statistics show that young voters tend to be unenrolled at much higher rates than voters, older voters. They go in and they don't immediately identify with one political party or the other. And so part of by making primaries more open to unenrolled voters, it does invite them into that process. It says, like, get involved, make your voice heard, and just anything that we think of, anything, whether it's, policy like that, or whether it's engagement work we do through Maine Students Vote, really just connecting with people, inviting them into the process any way you can really make a big difference. Okay, so I see the bill here. I think an act to eliminate the educational purposes exception to the prohibition on dissemination of obscene matter to minors. Okay, book banning.
Yeah, this was the book banning bill. Yeah.
So this is the kind of issue where, it falls under what I sort of described as this very wide range of, things. Like, clearly this undermines a well-functioning democracy. It restricts people's abilities to, to learn, to, get fully, their freedom, essentially. And so it's the kind of issue where it doesn't fall under our narrow scope of where we feel like we have, particular expertise to lend to the issue. That said, I will say this is the perfect kind of issue where, when we look to the organizations that are leading on these sorts of issues, like, for instance, this could be, the ACLU of Maine, and they come to us and they say, we think your perspective would be particularly useful. And we've been talking about this recently with some of the critical race theory bills, discussing how that harms our democracy. We're always happy to lend our voice where we think it can be especially useful.
Well, there was one other question in the chat that was wondering about the governor's veto last year of the foreign government spending bill. And I have to say, I did not read her veto letter. Do you recall what her reasons for vetoing that were? And does the current iteration of that bill address some of the concerns that she had that led her to veto?
Frankly, the veto letter for that was, and I've read a lot of veto letters, and even when I disagree with the governor, usually, I understand the legal argument that's being made, the values argument that's being made. Frankly, the veto letter for that bill, it didn't make sense. What the veto letter said was it essentially conflated businesses with foreign person ownership with entities that are foreign government owned. And the bill only bans foreign government owned entities, but there were several examples cited in the governor's veto letter that were instances of, businesses that had a foreign person owning some or all of the company, which wouldn't be banned under the bill. So really, I think it was sort of, a misunderstanding of the bill and its scope. And I'm hopeful that we can get that addressed this year. The governor's staff typically doesn't weigh in on bills until they get to the public hearing stage. So we'll see if there's any opportunity to work with them at that point.
Okay. If I could get you to stop sharing your screen just so that I can see the whole realm and see if anybody is waving their arms to ask questions. Does anyone have any additional questions for Will? If you do, just unmute yourself and fire away.
Yeah, on the National Popular Vote Compact, you said it almost passed in Maine. So what were the arguments of those who voted against it?
So there's a couple we hear. One is this belief that Maine will somehow be harmed because it's passed specifically. And to that, I would say, first off, that I think people overestimate how much attention Maine gets in a presidential election. And it's understandable because in 2020, there was a Senate election that got a ton of attention at the same time. But, really, the presidential election in Maine, it typically isn't, closely contested enough that that's what's drawing the attention to Maine. And even if it was, you know, really every vote, there's a more fundamental principle at play that every vote across the entire country should be equal. And then the other one that we hear often is concerns about the constitutionality of it. But as I said, you know, when you read the way that the language around electors is described in the US Constitution, I think it's pretty clear that it is constitutional.
Are there any other questions for
Yes.
Will?
I wonder if the League of Women Voters would think that a change in the Constitution to allow us to use ranked choice voting also for the governor's position would be appropriate.
Yes, we're very ardent supporters of that.
Wonderful.
We supported the original ranked choice voting, you know, bill as originally written. We've looked at, I will say with great interest at, in Alaska, there was a similar Supreme Court challenge to the Alaska Supreme Court, and they actually went out of their way in their opinion to say that the Maine Supreme Court had misinterpreted Maine's own constitution, which I thought was interesting. So we are looking at a constitutional amendment, though of course that needs 2/3, and the the political dynamics of that are difficult. But
Happy to report that our own Senator Cameron Reny is going to be sponsoring that bill.
Yes, I saw that in the bill titles.
It hasn't printed yet, but that bill is one of Cameron's.
Yes, we'll be there in ardent support of that. I was testifying against a bill to repeal ranked choice voting yesterday, which was a lot of fun actually to testify against.
Thank you very much.
But yeah, no, we fully support that.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so much, Will. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I'll also just put my email in the chat so folks can reach out if you have any further questions.
Thank you so much. And Will's going to stick around through the rest of our program here, just in case people have questions that come to mind after. And thank you for the segue there, the nice little segue about ranked choice voting and the amendment and our own legislator sponsoring those bills. Last month, we had the pleasure and the joy, actually, of hearing Representative Stover talk about some of the bills that she is sponsoring this legislative session. Tonight, we have two of our other legislators joining us, Representative Lydia Crafts from District 46 and Senator Cameron Reny from District 13. Autumn, if you don't mind sharing a link into the chat, we are tracking all of the bills that our legislators are sponsoring. I update this every week. A lot of the bills have not yet printed, which means they're not yet ready to be scheduled for a public hearing. So check back frequently to the link that Autumn just shared into the chat. And we're going to hear first from Lydia and then Cameron, and then we're going to take questions for both of them.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks everyone for being here this evening. It's great to join you, and I look forward to hopefully being back together in person also. I chose 3 bills to talk about tonight because all 3 of them, while extremely different in content, are all bills that were brought to me by groups or individuals who had a shared interest in the topic. And I thought this would be a good way to review just some of the legislation I'm putting out there, but also the importance of hearing ideas and solutions from folks right here in the district, because as you'll see, they are not always in my area of expertise. They are sometimes new or unique bills of, current matters that are things that we're facing in our state. So the first one is LD 440, which has got a whole long title, but it's basically to try to intervene and prevent financial scams in the state of Maine. So this was brought to me by Rand Maker of the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office, and as a representative of the Maine Sheriff's Association, they have a new reporting system in the Sheriff's Department across the state, and they looked at the totals of financial losses to scams in Lincoln County. And last year, residents of Lincoln County lost a total of $280,000 to fraudulent scams, with the largest single scam being worth $82,000. Across the state, as it says here, $21.7 million lost to scams. which is a huge loss. I was trying to find something to compare it to, and I looked up the cost of funding free breakfast and free lunch for all Maine students, and the total cost annually of that program is $34 million. So we're talking about numbers, 2/3 of the cost of feeding all the children in the state of Maine. So really significant. I then took that concern from RAND and went and looked across the country to see what other states are doing, and found that a lot of states are taking up new ideas, but haven't had a lot of success in passing them. New York and New Jersey each have, and their strategies were twofold. One, to provide signage at the point of sale or display of gift cards. So when I'm talking about gift cards, it's like small plastic national brands. So things like Target cards or Amazon cards, Visa gift cards, not your local, go to Reunion Station and get a gift certificate, but the ones that are good across state lines. And so a display warning of fraudulent scams that we are aware of using gift cards, and then training staff within companies to identify risks or signs that the number of or value of gift cards may indicate a fraudulent scam, and intervening and just checking in, making a human connection with that customer who's buying them, to make sure that they understand what some of the warning signs are, and to make sure they feel confident about the purchase they're making. I am working with the Retail Association of Maine, with other small businesses, wanting to make sure we're looking at targeting the right thing, that we're not putting undue burdens on other retailers or other types of gift certificates. So it's a work in progress. I will put out an ask for anyone. I'm sure many of us shop at similar stores, but if anyone happens to be in any grocery store in the next week, anywhere in the state of Maine, and sees a display rack of gift cards, if you could snap a picture and email it to me, it would be fantastic, because one of the claims is that stores are all doing this, and that it shouldn't have to be a law. And I'm trying to see if folks around the state are finding that there are warnings posted at the site. So that's a little ask for you all. I think that's good for that bill. If you want to move it over, Autumn, to the next, improve behavioral supports for students. This came to me from the State Teachers Union. And as I'm sure most of us have heard of, the incredibly intense increase of mental health needs of children coming out of COVID. Really, we are finding that schools have not been adequately staffed to help students, and the responsibility is really placed on teaching and support staff to help support children. And so what we are looking to do in this is to reduce the ratio of school counselors to students. Right now, elementary school and middle schools have a ratio of 300 to 1, and we're looking to reduce that to 350 to 1, reduce it to 250 to 1, and then add a 250 to 1 ratio for social workers. So folks who are really the ones with the expertise in addressing those clinical level needs in children, families who are experiencing significant mental health crises, substance abuse, domestic violence, just the issues that we see children showing up, housing insecurity and being unhoused. We know, especially in Lincoln County, how difficult it is and how disruptive it is when children and families are left without adequate housing resources. And it looks at how to help schools get the type of skills and the type of services they need, because sadly, schools have not fully funded clinical positions over the years. Well, easy may not be the word. It's sometimes when things get tight, positions like social workers and school counselors are more likely to get cut or reduced. So we're trying to encourage schools to staff up so that teachers are really left to do the job that they're trained and prepared to do. And school counselors and social workers are really helping kids meet their basic needs so that they are also ready to access their education. This has a whole bunch of support from all kinds of school psychologists. We're working with the University of Southern Maine, the Maine School Counselors Association. So a lot of statewide advocacy groups. And for those of you who I haven't met yet, this sort of ties into my background. I've worked in schools and in special education as a clinical social worker. Autumn, if you
Lydia, I
want.
see that bill has a public hearing next week.
Yes.
So if anyone here has a personal story that they think may help Lydia pass this bill, I encourage you to reach out to her and let her know, and we could help you craft legislation, or excuse me, testimony to submit, which you can do electronically. You don't have to go to Augusta to do that.
Absolutely. You can send in via online submission. You can Zoom in, you can come join us. It's a lot of fun in Augusta these days. Autumn, if you want to move to the next slide. Thank you. And the third one is an LR. So it hasn't been fully drafted. We just submitted our edits this week, but our very own Peter Arnold, who is here in tonight's meeting, brought this concern to me, and I am absolutely in no way an expert on mining history, or future mining needs in Maine. But as Peter and I talked more and more, and also with Senator Reny and some other folks, we've been talking a lot about it was prompted by the gigantic lithium deposit in Newry, as well as now some other local deposits that are being explored in the Warren, Union, Hope area. Our state has some of the strictest mining prohibition laws in the country. In 2017, a lot of energy and effort were put into creating and passing that legislation. And the new discovery of lithium deposits has reopened a conversation about what mining can or cannot look like in the state of Maine. And this was really from Peter's interest, I would suggest, we have a lot of big climate goals in our state. The Maine Won't Wait and Maine Climate Council, they have worked extremely diligently in creating some goals and working towards those goals to reduce our dependency on oil. And many of the electrification needs of our climate goals rely on rare earth minerals. And so the question that this commission is being asked to study comes down to, are there ways where domestic production makes sense safely and responsibly to help meet some of our climate goals? Or are we protected, and do we need to maintain the level of restrictive legislation that we have to protect our environment and our natural resources? And there are, I think, 8 mining bills this year coming forward, and they are a full spectrum, from a full moratorium, no lithium mining at all, to some bills that haven't been printed that may potentially reopen mining completely or with few safeguards in Maine. And so the design of this bill is to create a commission, which is not an active step in making any determination around any policy or change. It's to put together a group of stakeholders and experts in the area who have an expertise and can have a conversation and create recommendations to then bring back to the legislature. Because myself as a representative, and I imagine many of my colleagues who don't have expertise or background in such a significant topic of legislation and policymaking, I'm not prepared to pass legislation that could potentially reopen mining in the state of Maine when my predecessors worked so hard to protect the natural resources that we have. But I would like more information, and I want to make informed decisions. And so the goal of this bill is to create a commission to bring more of that information back to policymakers who are really tasked with making those difficult decisions. And I have also heard from local residents and folks who have been following the I'm blanking on the company, but the exploration in Warren. And I know there's been a great community response against that mining exploration. And I just encourage you, if you have strong opinions one way or the other, or questions, to please reach out to me and share those, because there's a lot of learning to be done. And there are a lot of pieces of this decision that the state's going to need to grapple with. And we are waiting on some legislation to come from the governor's office and her department. And knowing that, knowing the concerns that constituents in my own district have right now is really vital in making sure we're slowing down and taking steps we need to be able to pass good legislation or preserve the amazing legislation that we currently have. So if there is some news coverage, there are some projects in development. So there are likely to be places where my name is attached to this legislation. And I just want to say it's really important for folks to know that the goal of this bill is to find a middle ground and a place to start the conversation from. And I in no way am taking any position on mining exploration or moratorium. So those are the three bills I have. I will just add as a final note, the big focus of my legislative work has been and continues to be around substance use disorder and access to recovery services in our state. And I have some great, exciting bills around that. I would love to talk to folks more. And I think there's some really transformative work coming out of Augusta around helping reduce overdose deaths in the state and get folks connected with more detox and treatment services. So hopefully at another time, I would love to chat some more about that.
Thank you, Lydia. Unfortunately, I would love to. Being the policy geek that I am, I could go on this, but I think I'm starting to get a really good sense of just how big this is. Cameron, you are up next. And you'll need to unmute yourself.
We're trying. Oh, there we are. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? I can't see anyone.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. I chose 3 of my bills. I kind of just took one from each of the big buckets that I sort of ran on, right? So I put in a bill that has to do with housing. I'm going to explain a bill that has to do with healthcare, and then a bill that has to do with climate and climate resiliency. So it looks like the first one up is LD 1126, and I am honestly, I'm a fan of the governor's climate plan. I think it is both ambitious and attainable. This is a bill to hopefully increase the amounts of money that communities can get from the community action grants. So this is part of the Community Resiliency Partnership. And these grants, I really love them because they can be used for whatever it is that your own community needs, right? So one community may need to hire a planner to figure out what they need. One community may know that they have an uptick in the use of electric vehicles in the area, and they want to put in some electric vehicle charging stations someplace in a downtown area. It can be used for anything having to do with resiliency, climate resiliency specifically. So if you know that water is going to be water levels raising and you're in a low area, you can use it to build areas up. You could use it to expand sewer drainage. It can be, used for anything. And I like that idea because I think personal communities and towns often have a good idea of what it is that they actually need and can plan for it.
I just want to add very quickly here, there are towns in our county that have already benefited from this program. And I can only imagine how much more they could benefit if the grants were larger.
Yes, the grants can be larger and they can, and I'm 90% sure that even if, say, for example, Southport has already gotten a grant, I believe that they can apply for another grant up to that $100,000 kind of cap on that area. So it just gives people more ability to get themselves ready.
There's a public hearing for that bill. I just want to call people's attention to it on April 5th. And just as we were saying before with Lydia's bill that has a public hearing next week, if your town has structural issues, infrastructure issues that are going to be compromised by rising sea level or by anything related to climate change, they could benefit from this program, and they could really benefit from this program if it had a $100,000 cap as opposed to 50. So that would be a great opportunity for you to submit written testimony in support of Cameron's bill.
Yeah, growing up as I did and being a public educator for so long, you would think $50,000 would go further than it does, but I think we all know towns usually need a little more than that. So, all right, what's the next one here? Oh yeah, this one's cool. LD 1276. So this is one that both supports small businesses in my mind and supports good affordable housing. It does three big things essentially, and it's all to incentivize the conversion of business assets into cooperative or employee ownership. So it does three things, and it's really, in my mind, about small businesses being converted into employee co-ops. So across the country, the average age of a small business owner is about 55 years old. And in the state of Maine, it's about 65 years old. And so, you know, we all have to make life decisions. And as people want to begin to retire, we can't always find a buyer for that small business. So oftentimes these small businesses are ending up closing down or liquidating, and then they're gone. So what this bill would do would make the sale of any of those businesses, the income from it would be exempt from taxes if it's sold to an employee cooperative. In addition, the interest income earned from financing these conversions would be exempt for those Maine-based lenders. And on top of that, it would also create a position in the state under the Economic Development Department that would expand education and training opportunities and technical assistance to those business owners and their workers who want to make that conversion. So it's threefold, right? It will make business owners want to sell it to their employees. It makes it more likely for those employees to be able to get the funding that they need. And it also gives them the technical assistance that they need and the education they may need to learn how to even own and run an employee-owned business, right? A cooperative. So it does that, and it does the same thing for things like manufactured housing parks as well as apartment buildings, right? So that's a big thing that's been happening in the state is manufactured housing parks, you know, your mobile home parks. You know, they disproportionately house young families and older friends and neighbors, as well as disabled Mainers too. It's like a larger proportion of these people. And so when these owners of these manufactured housing parks want to, you know, they want to sell, they want to retire. They're also usually older people. Instead of selling to a big out-of-state corporation that usually jacks up all the rents until everybody has to move out and then they sell it at a profit, it makes resident-owned communities. So these communities will hopefully be working on there's another bill that will make it so they have to be alerted if their housing park is going to be sold. But they can create their own residential housing community, and often they already own the homes, they just don't own the land. And so it is resident-owned communities. We have a couple of them actually in this district already. and the quality of life is higher. People are more invested in the area. It's just, it preserves businesses, it preserves jobs, and it keeps affordable housing affordable, and it keeps these places being good places to live. So I'm really excited about this one. If you, I don't know if anybody knows any small business owners who have a small amount of employees that are, you know, thinking about retiring and like the idea of not paying as many taxes for, you know, selling it to a co-op instead, or if you know anybody that lives in any of these resident-owned communities. I think I've got an inn over at Pemquid Villas, but there's one in Waldeboro I'd love to get some feedback on. That would be wonderful. But no public hearing has been scheduled yet, so stay tuned. And then let's see. Oh yeah, this is a big one. So this is the healthcare bucket bill that I am pretty excited about. This is all about lowering the cost of prescription drugs for your average consumer, right? So, man, this is the weirdest job I've ever had. I have just been learning constantly now for months. And one of the things that I've been learning about is how hard it is to make a law to limit the profits that a company can make, because constitutions. So this is a way to do it in a trickier fashion. And what this does is it ties the cost of prescription drugs being sold in this state using a separate reference. And the reference that I'm intending to use, most likely, it's still up in the air a little bit, is Medicare prices, tying it to Medicare prices. So because of the Inflation Reduction Act, Medicare can now negotiate for better prices on pharmaceuticals for people who are insured with them. And if we can tie those prices together for other insurance companies as well in the state of Maine, whatever the reduction is for those Medicare patients will also have to be a reduction for people who are covered under other insurances in the state of Maine. I am working with the Senate President Troy Jackson on this fairly closely. There's a slight possibility it could be based on international references instead, maybe tying it to Canadian prescription prices. But I am working hard on this one, trying to get all those kinks smoothed out because the insurance companies are not going to like it. So for this one, just keep in mind, any personal stories can be very moving in these sorts of situations. Having people more than your average insurance lobbyists or consumers for affordable healthcare lobbyists, like real human stories make a difference about particularly about the cost of prescription drugs and what a burden it really can be. So if you have any great stories or know anybody has some great stories, come my way. Let's talk about it.
Thank you, Cameron. We're going to open the floor to questions. There was one question in the chat that I'm going to share with, this is for both of you. They're wondering if there are any bills being put forward that were related to LD 2003, which was the bill that was passed last year about the accessory dwelling units and affordable housing. If there are any, and Holly, I see that you're on the call too. So if any of the three of you know of any other bills related to that, or Will, even you, even though it's not something part of the league, if you could answer that question.
Yeah, there are a whole bunch of bills coming out, some of which clarify parts of 2003. There's going to be a gigantic package.
Okay. Holly. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
I'm on the housing committee and several of those are coming our way. We actually are meeting tomorrow. So there's some amendments to 2003, and then we have some other housing bills as well. So as Lydia indicated, there are multiple housing bills. some of are in the housing committee, some are in labor and housing, and I think some may even be in other committees. It's a little bit all over the place. So more to come on how we could focus one whole meeting on housing.
Right.
Because housing-
Holly, well, just as a reminder, Holly sits on the new housing, the Joint Standing Committee on Housing, which was created this year to help address our housing crisis. Holly is one of the people who sits on that committee. There's another question in the chat. I hear that other countries are able to get the prescription drug prices down. How do they do that? Barbara Cray had a response that I thought was right on target. Not having drug company lobbyists supported by Republican federal legislators would be one way to do it. But what I was hearing in your bill, Cameron, and what I've seen in other bills, there's some creativity that you're trying to get behind that would help to bring along people who ordinarily might not support a bill that would tie drug prices to Medicare pricing or to Canadian drug pricing, but you're having to be a little creative to get some people to come on board. Is that right?
Yeah. I've been put on the Health Coverage Insurance and Financial Services Committee, and I have learned so much about health insurance. And I still have so much more to learn, and it is an absolute beast. It is so complicated and multi-layered, and I have some theories as to why I think it benefits certain industries and companies to have it be so convoluted. But my understanding, the US, it has to do with lobbyists. It has to do with Republicans voting for it. It also has to do with our patent laws. And it also, some of the drug equivalencies, it has to do with the way we price things. Sometimes it's based on market value instead of based on how much it costs to actually produce the drug. There's 1,000 different acronyms in my mind right now, and it's almost 8:30, so I'm not going to try and sort them out for you at the moment. But yes, it's wildly complex in a way that I don't think that it should be. So that's why I'm trying to narrow in on prescription drugs specifically, the cost of drugs, and how we can get that down in a way that isn't that's going to help real people, and that is narrow enough that we all know what we're arguing for. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Are there any questions from anybody here beyond the ones that were dropped into the chat about the bills that Lydia and Cameron just talked about, or any of the other bills that are on their list?
Just so Cameron, I just want to say that just the bill to provide additional support for sustainability efforts on things, just give you a little sense. We live down in a way down on the point and in a coastal community, and our neighborhood is going to have to do some serious work on the erosion of the seawall right in around our neighborhood. And it's going to cost our neighborhood association an enormous amount of money to do it. And there really is no ability to get any kind of public funding to help deferring to the cost or support any of it. So I just want to really applaud you for that effort. It's really important. Just multiply what we're going to deal with in our own neighborhood by all the other neighborhoods that sort of are dealing with coastal resiliency issues or any other issues that are associated with climate change on it. And I think it's just a great effort and really important for this county to do that.
It's coming for us.
The only other thing I would sort of say is I just finished serving my first term on the Town of Bristol Budget Committee, and it was an eye-opening experience in that the town administrators of the various folks who have to put together the budgets are really unaware of the ability for whether it's state funding or federal funding or other things too. So I'd also encourage you in your bill to maybe think about including something at efforts aimed at educating local officials about the availability of funds, because our folks down in Bristol really are quite unaware of things that could really help advance some of the projects they want to do by coming up with alternative sources of funding.
That's a great idea.
Anyone else have any other questions or comments? Two things. I want to thank Peter Arnold for bringing the idea for the bill to have a more thoughtful approach. Let's not rush into the mining. Let's look and see the pros and cons, the whole thing. He brought that idea to Lydia and to Cameron, and he did that by offering to drive them to doors during the campaign. He had a captive audience. He took advantage of it. So keep that in mind when we're calling you to ask you to drive our candidates. You know, once we get them elected, you can feed them your ideas for the bills. And then if you'll just bear with me for one more thing, I wanted to ask Holly. Holly told me this week about a new bill that she has put in since we met last month that would, as you all have read, the SNAP benefits, food stamp benefits that were expanded during COVID, that expansion has ended. And that is costing families anywhere between $90 to $150 a month in food assistance that they desperately need. And I was thrilled when I heard from Holly that she is submitting a bill that would have the state make up that difference. Holly, do you want to share a little bit about that? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Kelly. So as you know, the SNAP benefit, it was a bump. I call it a bump. I don't have another word for it. It was a federal increase through the ARPA funds that came off. The Department of Health and Human Services in Maine made the last allotment to EBT cards on February 28th. So even though it ended on March 1st, people aren't experiencing that loss yet. But as I've said to other people, just hold on tight, because when people do not get their allotment April 1st, we're going to hear from a lot of folks. And I've seen a lot of folks who have brought their letters. And it's pretty shocking. An 80-year-old woman who has been getting $260 a month for 3 years got her letter that she's rolling back to $20 a month. So she's been getting $260, which is $65 a week, which still is not a lot of groceries. That's a bag of groceries, maybe, but she's being taken back to $20. So this fiscal cliff is going to have tremendous impact. The other piece of this, there's two sides of it. The SNAP benefit increase is $20 million a month to Maine vendors. Every little store that takes, every mom and pop, every Hannaford, every Shaw's, every Market Basket. So $20 million a month is going to come out of Maine's economy right now, next month. So I think when we think about this, there's two sides to this. One is tremendous food insecurity exists already, inflationary costs. So this bill has a transitional, it is not a permanent fix. A permanent fix would have been $230 million a year or $460 million over the biennium. It is not feasible. I would like to make it feasible. It was a fantasy for 10 minutes or so. But what we can do is try for a transitional benefit to help people titrate down in a way that feels better. We cannot figure out how to do it. And so we're going forward with the bill, regardless of the how, because the Department of Health and Human Services needs 3 months to load anything onto an EBT card. So this should have been talked about in September or any time forward. Now we're here, but we're trying to think as creatively as possible. We're Mainers, so that's what we do really well. So what it would be is start at 100%, go down to 75, 2 months at 25, 2 months at 50, and then 2 months at 25, and then you would come off. And I don't know what we're going to do. So the anticipation around this bill is that if the Farm Bill moves forward, there's some additional SNAP benefit in there. It's not a lot, but it's certainly more than $20 a month. It increases the base to 50. That's not great. Let's not delude ourselves, but it would help. So that's the thinking behind the titration down to the base benefit. And then ideally, if the Farm Bill does pass, Marge Kilkelly promises me that the Farm Bill always passes somehow. So I'm counting on it. So if the Farm Bill were to pass and people's base went from 20 to 50, it's going to help families a lot. But we are going to have to, and when I say we, collectively, I know Lincoln County Democrats did a lot around food collection. It is going to be a really big deal. And we have veggies to table. We have the gleaners. We have our food pantries. We have our little community fridge program down here. It's going to take everybody all over this county to make sure people get fed. And thank goodness we have free breakfast and lunch for children, and we have summer feeding programs for children, because it is really scary what is going to happen to families And we're talking in a very short amount of time. So
Thank
that's
you,
the bill.
Holly.
It's out, but it hasn't been turned back in. But it is an emergency bill, so it will pop up really quickly. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to thank all of the speakers that we've had here tonight, our legislators, and Will, if we could give them all a round of applause, and you can take yourself off of mute if you like, or just, do this or this.